The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Marcus Thompson's laughter echoed across the Grand Ballroom. "Look who actually showed up," he said loud enough for half the room to hear. "I'm surprised they let you in without a staff badge." His cronies snickered as I stood there in my simple black dress, watching 300 of Austin's tech elite mingle in their designer suits and $1,000 gowns. What they didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, I would be walking to that podium as the newly announced CEO of Pinnacle Tech Solutions. What they couldn't have imagined was that the woman they'd spent 3 years calling the IT girl had been quietly orchestrating the biggest transformation in company history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hilton downtown Austin had never looked more intimidating. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors as servers weaved through clusters of executives, each group more exclusive than the last. I had arrived precisely on time, not fashionably late like the senior management team, not awkwardly early like the junior staff trying to network their way up the ladder. I came when I needed to be there, because tonight wasn't about making impressions anymore. Tonight was about revealing truths. Amanda Walsh spotted me first from across the room, her perfectly manicured hand immediately reaching for her phone. I could practically see the group text forming in her mind, something about how desperate I must be to attend an event so clearly above my station. She whispered something to David Chen, who turned to look at me with that familiar expression of disdain mixed with pity. They saw what they had always seen: Emily Carter, the quiet girl from technical support who somehow managed to stick around despite never quite fitting in with the company culture. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so exhausting. For 3 years, I had watched these same people dismiss every idea I brought forward, every solution I offered, every attempt I made to contribute beyond my supposed limitations. When I suggested the client retention strategy that eventually saved us $2 million in annual revenue, Marcus had presented it to the board as his own innovation. When I identified the security vulnerability that could have cost us everything, Amanda had made sure the credit went to her team while I remained invisible in the background. But tonight, none of that mattered anymore. Tonight, Robert Hayes would step down as CEO and the board of directors would announce his replacement. The speculation had been building for months, with Marcus positioning himself as the obvious successor and Amanda campaigning hard for the chief operating officer role she believed she deserved. What none of them knew was that 18 months ago, the board had approached me directly with a proposition that would change everything. The offer had come through Jessica Liu, the only person in the company who had recognized my potential from day one. She had been working quietly with the board members who were concerned about the company's direction, the toxic culture that was driving away top talent, and the lack of innovative thinking in senior leadership. They needed someone who understood the business from the ground up, someone who could modernize operations without alienating clients, someone who could lead by example rather than intimidation. They needed someone the current management team would never see coming. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Instead of announcing my promotion and watching the office politics destroy any chance of meaningful change, the board had asked me to spend the next 18 months working undercover throughout different departments. Officially, I remained in technical support, handling routine maintenance and user problems. Unofficially, I was conducting the most comprehensive analysis of company operations in Pinnacle Tech's history. I had worked in sales, learning how Marcus's aggressive tactics were creating unsustainable client relationships. I had spent time in marketing, discovering how Amanda's ego-driven campaigns were missing their target demographics entirely. I had embedded myself in accounting, human resources, and project management, building relationships with employees who had been overlooked and undervalued for years. Most importantly, I had been documenting everything. Every inefficiency, every missed opportunity, every instance of discrimination or harassment that had been swept under the rug. I had built a comprehensive reform strategy that would transform Pinnacle Tech from a dysfunctional boys' club into the innovative, inclusive company it had the potential to become. But first, I had to survive this party. Marcus was holding court near the bar, regaling his audience with another story about his latest sales triumph. He caught sight of me and his expression shifted to something between amusement and annoyance. "Emily," he called out, loud enough to draw attention. "Enjoying the party? I know these events can be overwhelming for someone from your department." The group around him chuckled, that polite corporate laughter that masked genuine cruelty. I walked over slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "It's certainly an interesting perspective," I replied calmly. "Seeing everyone in their element." "Your element would be the server room," Amanda chimed in, appearing at Marcus's elbow like a perfectly coordinated attack, "though I suppose even IT people deserve a night out occasionally." David Chen nodded enthusiastically, always eager to pile on when he sensed weakness. "At least someone has to keep the computers running while the real work gets done upstairs." The insults rolled off me like water. I had heard variations of these same comments for 3 years, and they had long since lost their power to wound. What struck me instead was how predictable they all were, how small their world had become through their own arrogance. They genuinely believed that their casual cruelty made them superior, that their ability to exclude and diminish others was a sign of leadership rather than insecurity. "Speaking of real work," Marcus continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well, "I hope you've been keeping our systems secure. Wouldn't want any technical difficulties during the big announcement tonight." I smiled at that, a genuine smile that seemed to confuse him. "I think you'll find everything is running exactly as it should be." The conversation continued around me as more senior staff joined the circle, each person trying to establish their position in the hierarchy through subtle put-downs and strategic name-dropping. I listened to them discuss the CEO transition as if it were a foregone conclusion, mapping out the new organizational structure with Marcus at the top, and themselves in various positions of power beneath him. "Of course there will be some restructuring," Amanda was saying. "We'll need to eliminate redundancies, streamline operations. Some departments that have been coasting on legacy systems will need to justify their existence." She looked directly at me as she said it, making her meaning clear. In their version of the future, people like me would be among the first casualties of their new regime. The technical support staff, the administrative assistants, the junior employees who kept the company running but didn't generate revenue directly, we would be sacrificed to improve the bottom line and make room for their preferred hires. "Change is inevitable," David added sagely, as if he had come up with the insight himself.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"The board knows we need strong leadership to take Pinnacle Tech to the next level." I nodded thoughtfully. "Strong leadership is definitely important. Vision, integrity, the ability to make difficult decisions, the willingness to challenge existing power structures when they're not serving the company's best interests." Marcus laughed, but there was an edge to it now. Something in my tone seemed to have caught his attention. "Exactly, though I'm not sure everyone here would understand what real leadership looks like." "Oh, I think I have a pretty good idea," I replied quietly. The conversation moved on, but Marcus kept glancing at me with growing suspicion. After 3 years of watching me accept every slight without protest, my composure tonight was apparently unsettling him. He was used to seeing me shrink away from confrontation, to apologize for taking up space, to defer to his authority automatically. My calm confidence was disrupting his expectations, and he didn't like it. Jessica Liu materialized at my elbow with perfect timing, as she always did. "Emily, there you are. Robert Hayes was asking about you earlier." The group around Marcus went silent. The outgoing CEO asking about someone from technical support was unprecedented, and they didn't know how to process the information. "Oh," Amanda's voice was carefully casual, "what could he possibly want with IT?" Jessica smiled mysteriously. "I think he mentioned something about recognizing contributions that haven't gotten enough attention. People who've been essential to the company's success but haven't always been visible to upper management." I could see the wheels turning in their minds, trying to figure out what this meant. Had I been selected for some kind of service award? Were they planning to highlight support staff during the transition ceremony? The idea that I might be receiving recognition clearly bothered them, but they couldn't quite articulate why. Well, Marcus said finally, I'm sure whatever contributions Emily has made have been valuable in their own small way. The dismissal was automatic, reflexive. Even when faced with evidence that I might be worth more than they had assumed, he couldn't conceive of a reality where their fundamental assessment of my worth was wrong. His worldview depended on maintaining strict hierarchies, on keeping people like me in clearly defined boxes that didn't threaten his sense of superiority. Small contributions can have big impacts, I said quietly. Sometimes the most important work happens behind the scenes, where people don't think to look. Amanda laughed, but it sounded forced. Oh please, let's not pretend that fixing printer problems is going to revolutionize the company. You'd be surprised what you can learn from paying attention to the details everyone else ignores. I replied. Patterns emerge when you look at the whole system instead of just your individual piece of it. The group was getting restless now, unsure why they were still talking to me but unable to extract themselves gracefully. Marcus finished his drink and set the glass down with more force than necessary. Well, this has been enlightening, he said with heavy sarcasm. But I should probably go network with people who actually matter to the company's future. As he walked away, followed by his usual entourage, I felt Jessica squeeze my arm gently. 15 more minutes, she whispered. 15 minutes until Robert Hayes would take the stage to announce his retirement and introduce his successor. 15 minutes until 3 years of careful planning and strategic positioning would finally pay off. 15 minutes until the people who had spent so long dismissing me would learn exactly how wrong they had been. I looked around the ballroom one more time, taking in the scene. The elaborate decorations, the designer outfits, the carefully choreographed conversations designed to reinforce existing power structures. All of it built on the assumption that the people at the top deserved to be there, that success was a meritocracy, that someone like me could never pose a real threat to their established order. They were about to discover how dangerous assumptions could be. The lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. Robert Hayes was approaching the podium, his expression serious and ceremonial. This was it, the moment that would divide my life into before and after, the moment when everything I had worked toward would finally be revealed. I smoothed my simple black dress and walked toward the front of the room, weaving through clusters of executives who barely noticed my movement. After all, why would they pay attention to someone they had already written off? In a few minutes, they would have no choice but to see me clearly for the first time, and I was ready to show them exactly who Emily Carter really was. Robert Hayes stood at the podium with the gravitas that had made him legendary in Austin's tech scene. His silver hair gleamed under the ballroom lights as he surveyed the crowd with the measured gaze of someone who had built empires and toppled competitors with equal ease. The room fell into complete silence. 300 pairs of eyes focused on the man who had transformed Pinnacle Tech from a scrappy startup into a $150 million powerhouse. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried easily across the ballroom without amplification, a skill perfected through decades of commanding boardrooms and conference halls. Tonight marks the end of an era and the beginning of something extraordinary. I positioned myself near the side wall, close enough to see the subtle shift in body language as the crowd prepared for what they believed would be a predictable succession announcement. Marcus had straightened his tie and smoothed his hair, positioning himself where the cameras would catch his reaction. Amanda had moved strategically closer to the front, her practiced smile ready for the moment when she would need to appear graciously surprised by her elevation to the C-suite. The anticipation was palpable, electric with the kind of energy that comes when ambitious people believe their moment has finally arrived. Conversations had died mid-sentence, champagne glasses held forgotten in manicured hands as everyone focused on the podium where their futures would be decided. When I founded this company 12 years ago, Hayes continued, his voice carrying the weight of nostalgia mixed with pride, I had a simple vision: technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. our solutions should make lives better, businesses stronger, communities more connected. The speech was quintessential Hayes, mixing idealistic vision with practical business sense. He had always been gifted at making profit motives sound like moral imperatives, at convincing clients that choosing Pinnacle Tech was not just good business but an ethical obligation. It was one of the many leadership techniques I had studied during my 18 months of preparation. That vision has guided every decision we've made, every hire we've brought on board, every partnership we've forged. But vision alone doesn't build companies. Vision requires execution, dedication, and most importantly, the right people in the right positions. Marcus shifted slightly, his confidence radiating across the room like heat from a furnace. He had spent months positioning himself as Hayes's natural successor, cultivating relationships with board members, showcasing his sales achievements, and subtly undermining potential competitors. His campaign had been methodical and ruthless, qualities that had served him well in client acquisition but had also created the toxic culture that was slowly poisoning the company from within. The technology industry changes at lightning speed, Hayes continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. What worked yesterday may be obsolete tomorrow. Companies that fail to evolve, that cling to outdated methods and hierarchies, inevitably fall behind their more adaptive competitors. I caught Jessica's eye from across the room. She gave me the slightest nod, a signal that everything was proceeding according to plan. The board members were positioned strategically throughout the crowd, their faces carefully neutral but their attention focused with laser intensity on Hayes's every word. They knew what was coming, had been planning this moment for months, but even they seemed caught up in the drama of the evening. Leadership in this environment requires more than traditional qualifications, Hayes said, and I noticed several people in the crowd exchanging glances. This wasn't the speech they had expected, not the straightforward announcement of Marcus's promotion that everyone had anticipated. It requires deep understanding of every aspect of the business, the ability to see connections that others miss, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom when it's holding us back. Amanda's smile had become slightly strained. She was intelligent enough to recognize that the speech was taking an unexpected direction, though she couldn't yet foresee where it was leading. Her carefully rehearsed reactions were becoming less certain as Hayes continued to deviate from the script she had imagined. Over the past 18 months, our board of directors has been conducting the most comprehensive leadership evaluation in company history, Hayes announced, and a murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. This was news to most of them, information that had been kept confidential at the highest levels. We've looked beyond titles and traditional metrics to identify the qualities that will be essential for our next phase of growth. Marcus's confidence was beginning to show hairline cracks. His smile remained fixed, but his eyes had narrowed slightly as he tried to process this unexpected development. The evaluation Hayes was describing hadn't been part of any official company communications, hadn't been announced in leadership meetings or discussed in strategic planning sessions. We've observed how different leadership styles impact employee retention, innovation, and client satisfaction, Hayes continued methodically. We've analyzed which approaches generate sustainable growth versus short-term gains. We've examined how various management philosophies affect company culture and long-term viability. The room was completely still now, the kind of silence that develops when people realize they're witnessing something significant but aren't sure what it means for them personally. The servers had stopped moving, the bartenders had paused their glass polishing, even the background music seemed to have faded to nothing. What we discovered was both troubling and inspiring, Hayes said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Troubling because some of our most visible leaders were creating environments that stifled innovation and drove away top talent. Inspiring because we found exceptional leadership potential in places where conventional wisdom suggested we shouldn't look. I could see David Chen whispering urgently to someone near him, probably trying to figure out what this meant for his own career trajectory. His usual smugness had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that the evening might not unfold according to his expectations. Traditional corporate hierarchies often fail to recognize transformational leaders, Hayes continued, particularly when those leaders don't fit established profiles or work outside conventional power structures. We've learned that the most effective change agents are often the people who understand organizations from the ground up, who see problems that management-level employees miss, who build trust through competence rather than authority. The speech was masterful in its construction, simultaneously revealing and concealing, preparing the audience for a surprise, while still maintaining suspense about its exact nature. Hayes had always been skilled at managing information flow, at building anticipation that served his strategic purposes. Marcus was no longer smiling. His expression had shifted to something between confusion and concern, as he tried to reconcile Hayes's words with his expectations about the evening. He had built his campaign on the assumption that visible achievement and traditional qualifications would automatically translate to promotion. The criteria Hayes was describing suggested a different value system entirely. Effective leadership in the modern technology sector requires emotional intelligence, systems thinking, and the ability to inspire rather than intimidate, Hayes said, and I saw several people in the crowd glance involuntarily toward Marcus. His reputation for aggressive management tactics was well known throughout the company, though it had never been officially acknowledged as problematic. It requires leaders who can build consensus while making difficult decisions, who can drive change without destroying valuable relationships, who can see the big picture while maintaining attention to crucial details. Amanda had stopped pretending to smile entirely. Her political instincts were sharp enough to recognize that Hayes's speech was systematically undermining everything she and Marcus had assumed about the succession process. The qualities he was highlighting were not the ones either of them had been showcasing in their campaigns for promotion. Most importantly, Hayes continued, his voice rising slightly with emphasis, it requires leaders who have demonstrated their commitment to the company's success over their own advancement, who have proven their ability to work effectively with people at every level of the organization. The crowd was getting restless now, the prolonged suspense creating an almost unbearable tension. People were shifting in their positions, glancing at their watches, exchanging meaningful looks with colleagues. The anticipation had transformed from excitement into anxiety, as it became clear that their assumptions about the evening were being systematically dismantled. The board's evaluation process has been extensive and rigorous, Hayes announced. We've conducted confidential interviews with employees at every level of the company. We've analyzed performance data going back 3 years. We've observed leadership behavior in both formal and informal settings. I knew that the evaluation he was describing had been real and thorough. The board had indeed spoken with employees throughout the company, though most hadn't realized the conversations were part of a CEO selection process. They had shared their experiences with different managers, their thoughts about company culture, their ideas about what changes would improve workplace satisfaction and productivity. The feedback had been overwhelmingly clear. Marcus's aggressive sales tactics might generate short-term revenue, but they were creating unsustainable client relationships and driving away valuable team members. Amanda's ego-driven approach to marketing was alienating potential customers and creating internal conflicts that reduced overall effectiveness. Meanwhile, employees consistently mentioned one person who had made their work lives better, who had solved problems without seeking credit, who had demonstrated integrity and competence in every interaction. They described someone who understood technology and business with equal facility, who could communicate complex concepts clearly to both technical and non-technical audiences, who had quietly become indispensable to operations across multiple departments. They were describing me, though most of them didn't realize the broader significance of their observations. After extensive deliberation, Hayes said, pausing for dramatic effect, the board has selected our next chief executive officer. This person has demonstrated exceptional leadership potential through 3 years of outstanding service to Pinnacle Tech. They have shown the vision, integrity, and strategic thinking necessary to guide our company into its next phase of growth. Marcus had gone completely rigid, his face a mask of controlled panic, as he realized that his assumed promotion was not materializing. The confident smile he had worn all evening had disappeared entirely, replaced by the kind of desperate calculation that comes when carefully laid plans begin to collapse. Amanda was scanning the room now, trying to identify who might be receiving the promotion she had expected. Her gaze moved systematically across the senior management team, the department heads, the board members themselves, searching for some clue about the surprise announcement that was unfolding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom with perfect clarity, "please join me in welcoming Pinnacle Tech's new Chief Executive Officer." The pause that followed seemed to stretch infinitely, the entire room holding its breath as 300 people waited to discover who would be leading their company into the future. Hayes turned slightly, his gaze moving across the crowd until it found exactly who he was looking for. His eyes met mine across the ballroom, and he smiled with genuine warmth and respect. "Emily Carter." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for more information, but the stunned, disbelieving silence of people whose fundamental understanding of reality has just been shattered. 300 successful, ambitious, carefully dressed professionals stood frozen in place, trying to process information that didn't fit any framework they possessed for understanding the world. I began walking toward the podium, my heels clicking steadily against the marble floor. In the overwhelming quiet, every step was measured and deliberate, each movement designed to project confidence and authority. The crowd parted automatically, creating a path through their shocked ranks as I made my way to the front of the room. Marcus stood like a statue, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words emerged. The man who had built his identity around verbal dominance and aggressive confidence had been rendered speechless by an outcome he couldn't have imagined. Amanda's reaction was different, but equally dramatic. Her carefully maintained composure cracked visibly, revealing the raw ambition and entitlement beneath her professional facade. She looked around desperately, as if expecting someone to reveal that this was all an elaborate practical joke, that the real announcement was still coming. David Chen had gone pale, his usual smugness replaced by genuine fear, as he contemplated what my promotion might mean for his own future. The casual cruelty he had displayed earlier in the evening suddenly seemed like catastrophically poor judgment rather than harmless entertainment. As I reached the podium, Hayes stepped aside with a gesture of respect that spoke volumes about the board's confidence in their decision. The symbolism was unmistakable, the old guard willingly yielding authority to new leadership, tradition making space for transformation. I looked out over the assembled crowd, taking in their shocked faces, their confusion, their desperate attempts to reconcile this new reality with their previous assumptions about how the world worked. These were the same people who had dismissed me for 3 years, who had treated me as invisible, who had made jokes about my presumed limitations and lack of ambition. Now they were staring at me with the dawning realization that every slight, every casual insult, every dismissive comment had been directed at their future CEO. The woman they had considered beneath their notice was about to become the most powerful person in their professional lives. I stepped up to the microphone, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "Thank you, Robert, and thank you to the board of directors for this incredible opportunity," I began, my tone professional but warm. "I know this announcement comes as a surprise to many of you. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to explain how we got here and share my vision for where we're going." The crowd remained frozen, still processing the impossibility of what they were witnessing. 3 years of treating me as a second-class employee had not prepared them for the possibility that I might be their superior. Their worldview had no framework for understanding how someone they had categorized as powerless could suddenly possess ultimate authority over their careers. But they were about to learn that their categories had been wrong from the beginning, and that their assumptions about power, merit, and leadership were about to be thoroughly dismantled. The microphone hummed softly as I adjusted it to my height, a small technical detail that somehow seemed to amplify the surreal nature of the moment. 300 faces stared back at me with varying degrees of shock, confusion, and in some cases barely concealed hostility. The ballroom that had buzzed with confident chatter just minutes earlier now felt like a tomb, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence. I took a steady breath and began to speak, my voice carrying with the kind of calm authority I had been developing in secret for 18 months. I understand that many of you are wondering how someone from technical support could possibly be qualified to lead this company. That's a fair question, and one that deserves a thorough answer. Marcus had finally managed to close his mouth, but his expression remained fixed in something between disbelief and fury. He stood rigid among his cluster of supporters, all of whom were glancing between him and me as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The man who had spent the entire evening treating me like an inconsequential annoyance was now forced to confront the reality that I held absolute power over his professional future. The truth is, I haven't been just working in technical support for the past 18 months, I continued, watching as several people in the crowd leaned forward slightly, desperate for any information that might help them make sense of what was happening. I've been conducting a comprehensive analysis of every department in this company, working directly with employees at every level to understand our strengths, our weaknesses, and our opportunities for growth. Amanda's face had gone through several color changes, settling on an unhealthy shade somewhere between pale and green. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't disguise the fact that she was experiencing something close to physical shock. The woman who had spent years positioning herself as the natural choice for executive leadership was watching her assumptions crumble in real time. This wasn't a traditional management consulting arrangement, I explained, my tone remaining conversational despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. The board asked me to work from within, to experience our company culture firsthand rather than observing it from a distance. They wanted someone who could identify problems that conventional analysis might miss, someone who could build trust with employees across all levels of the organization. I could see wheels turning in various minds throughout the crowd as people began to reconsider our previous interactions through this new lens. The quiet woman from IT who had helped them solve technical problems had actually been evaluating their leadership styles, their communication methods, their treatment of subordinates. Every casual conversation, every moment of workplace drama, every display of professional competence or incompetence had been observed and documented by someone they had never considered a threat. During these 18 months, I've had the privilege of working alongside some truly exceptional people, I said, allowing my gaze to move across the room to acknowledge various employees who had impressed me with their dedication and talent. I've also observed behaviors and practices that are holding us back from reaching our full potential. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Everyone was now wondering what exactly I had seen, what I had documented, what confidential information I might possess about their professional conduct. The executives who had treated me dismissively were beginning to realize that their casual cruelty might have serious consequences now that the power dynamic had shifted so dramatically. Let me share some of what I've learned, I continued, pulling out a small tablet that I had kept hidden until this moment. The gesture was deliberate, designed to demonstrate that I had come prepared with specific evidence rather than vague accusations. Our employee satisfaction scores have declined by 37% over the past 2 years. Our client retention rate has dropped 15% in the same period. Our innovation pipeline has slowed to the point where we're essentially competing on price rather than unique value propositions. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. These were metrics he had been aware of but had attributed to market conditions rather than internal management issues. Hearing them presented as evidence of systemic problems was clearly making him nervous, particularly since his own aggressive management style was undoubtedly a contributing factor to at least some of these negative trends. More concerning are the patterns I've observed in our workplace culture, I said, my voice taking on a slightly more serious tone. 43% of our employees report feeling undervalued in their current roles. 61% say they don't feel comfortable sharing ideas or concerns with senior management. 28% are actively looking for new employment opportunities. The statistics were devastating, and I could see their impact rippling through the crowd. Department heads were doing quick mental calculations, trying to figure out which of their team members might be among the dissatisfied employees I was describing. The senior executives were beginning to understand that their leadership methods had created measurable problems that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. These aren't just numbers, I emphasized, looking directly at Marcus as I spoke. They represent real people who have valuable contributions to make but haven't been given the opportunity or encouragement to make them. They represent lost innovation, missed opportunities, and ultimately reduced profitability. Amanda was whispering urgently to someone near her, probably trying to figure out how this development would affect her own position in the company. Her political instincts were sharp enough to recognize that the old power structures were being dismantled, but she hadn't yet figured out how to position herself advantageously in whatever new system was emerging. The board didn't ask me to document problems without proposing solutions, I continued, advancing to the next section of what was clearly a well-prepared presentation. Over the past 18 months, I've developed a comprehensive strategy for addressing these issues and positioning Pinnacle Tech for sustainable growth. I tapped the tablet screen, and the large display behind me illuminated with the first slide of a presentation that represented months of careful analysis and strategic planning. The title read, Pinnacle Tech 2.0, Building Excellence Through Inclusive Leadership, and the subtitle promised a 5-year transformation strategy. The crowd stirred slightly as people realized this wasn't just an impromptu speech, but a detailed business plan that had been months in the making. The level of preparation I was demonstrating suggested that my promotion hadn't been a last-minute decision, but the culmination of an extensive evaluation and planning process. Our transformation strategy focuses on 3 core areas, I announced, advancing to a slide that outlined the main pillars of my approach: cultural reform, operational efficiency, and innovation acceleration. Each of these areas requires fundamental changes in how we operate, but the potential returns are substantial. The first detailed slide focused on cultural reform, and I could see several people in the crowd tensing as they realized this section would likely address their own behavior and management styles directly. Cultural reform begins with leadership accountability. I said clearly, we will be implementing comprehensive 360-degree reviews for all management positions, with employee feedback carrying significant weight in performance evaluations. Leaders who create toxic environments or drive away talented team members will be required to change their approaches or find new roles where their methods are more appropriate. Marcus's jaw tightened visibly. The system I was describing would make his aggressive tactics and intimidation strategies professional liabilities rather than assets. His entire approach to management was built on the assumption that fear and competition were more effective motivators than collaboration and support. We will also be establishing clear protocols for reporting harassment, discrimination, and other forms of workplace misconduct. I continued, making eye contact with several people who I knew had experienced problems that had been swept under the rug in the past. These reports will be investigated thoroughly and handled with appropriate seriousness, regardless of the seniority or perceived value of the individuals involved. David Chen had gone completely pale. His history of making inappropriate comments and participating in exclusionary behavior was about to become a significant professional liability. The casual cruelty that had been tolerated or even encouraged in the previous culture would have serious consequences under the new leadership structure. Operational efficiency improvements will focus on eliminating redundancies and streamlining decision-making processes, I announced, advancing to the next major section of the presentation. We've identified 17 different approval processes that currently require signatures from multiple departments, even for routine decisions. This bureaucratic overhead is slowing our response time and frustrating both employees and clients. The operational reforms I was describing would reduce the power of middle managers who had built their influence on controlling access and information flow. People like Amanda, who had created little fiefdoms within their departments, would find their authority structures significantly altered by the new streamlined processes. We will be implementing project-based team structures that bring together expertise from multiple departments, I explained. Instead of rigid hierarchical reporting, employees will work on cross-functional teams led by whoever has the most relevant experience for each specific project. This was perhaps the most radical change I was proposing, and I could see its implications dawning on various faces throughout the crowd. The traditional corporate ladder, where advancement meant moving up through departmental hierarchies, would be replaced by a more fluid system that rewarded competence and contribution over seniority and office politics. Innovation acceleration represents our biggest opportunity for competitive advantage, I said, moving to the final major section of the strategy. Our current approach to product development is too centralized and too risk-averse. We're missing opportunities because good ideas get filtered out by layers of approval that prioritize safety over creativity. I had seen this problem firsthand during my embedded work experience. Brilliant concepts from junior employees were routinely dismissed or diluted by senior managers who were more concerned with protecting their own positions than fostering innovation. The result was a pipeline filled with incremental improvements rather than breakthrough solutions. We will be establishing innovation labs within each department, with dedicated time and resources for exploring experimental approaches, I announced. Every employee will be encouraged to contribute ideas, and we will have transparent processes for evaluating and implementing the most promising concepts. The implications of this change were staggering. Junior employees who had been marginalized under the previous system would suddenly have direct channels for influencing company direction. Senior managers who had built their careers on controlling information and suppressing potential challengers would find themselves competing on merit with people they had previously dismissed. These changes will not be implemented overnight, I acknowledged, recognizing that the scope of transformation I was describing might seem overwhelming. We will roll out reforms systematically over the next 12 months, with regular feedback sessions to ensure that we're achieving our intended objectives without creating unnecessary disruption. The crowd was beginning to stir more noticeably now as the initial shock wore off, and people started processing the practical implications of what I was proposing. Some faces showed excitement as employees realized they might finally have opportunities to contribute meaningfully to company success. Others showed concern or outright fear as managers contemplated the potential impact on their own authority and job security. I want to be clear about something, I said, my voice taking on a more personal tone as I prepared to address the elephant in the room directly. I know that some of you are wondering whether someone in my position can really understand the challenges of executive leadership. You're thinking about my age, my background, my previous role in the company. Marcus was nodding slightly, probably hoping that I would acknowledge my own limitations and perhaps step aside in favor of someone more traditionally qualified. His expression suggested that he still couldn't quite believe this wasn't all some elaborate misunderstanding that would be corrected momentarily. Those are legitimate concerns, I continued, and I don't expect anyone to simply trust my qualifications based on tonight's announcement. Over the next 30 days, I will be meeting individually with every department head, every team leader, and every employee who wants to discuss our transformation strategy. The commitment I was making was unprecedented in corporate leadership transitions. Most new CEOs relied on existing management structures to implement their vision, maintaining distance from rank-and-file employees. I was proposing direct engagement with every level of the organization, a time-intensive approach that demonstrated both confidence and respect for employee input. These won't be ceremonial meet-and-greet sessions, I emphasized. I want to hear your ideas, your concerns, your suggestions for improvement. The strategy I've outlined tonight is based on 18 months of observation and analysis, but it will only succeed if we refine it based on ongoing feedback from the people who will be implementing it daily. Amanda had stopped whispering to her companions and was staring at me with what looked like grudging respect mixed with calculation. Her political instincts were telling her that resistance would be futile and potentially career-ending, but she was clearly trying to figure out how to position herself advantageously within the new system I was creating. I also want to address the question of accountability, I said, advancing to a slide that outlined performance metrics and evaluation criteria. My success as CEO will be measured by the same standards I'm applying to everyone else. If employee satisfaction doesn't improve, if client retention doesn't increase, if innovation doesn't accelerate, then I will have failed in my responsibilities. The transparency I was offering was unusual in corporate leadership, where executives often shielded themselves from direct accountability through complex reporting structures and carefully managed metrics. By committing to measurable improvements in specific areas, I was creating clear benchmarks for evaluating my own performance. The board of directors will be conducting quarterly reviews of my performance, with input from employees at every level of the organization, I announced. If I'm not meeting the standards we've established, if the transformation strategy isn't producing results, then they will find someone who can do better. This level of accountability was almost unheard of in CEO transitions, and I could see its impact on the crowd. People who had expected me to use my new position to consolidate power and protect myself from criticism were instead hearing me commit to unprecedented transparency and responsibility. Finally, I want to say something about respect, I concluded, looking directly at the people who had spent the evening treating me as beneath their notice. Everyone in this room contributes value to Pinnacle Tech's success. The receptionist who creates our client's first impression, the janitor who maintains our professional environment, the technical support specialist who keeps our systems running smoothly. Every role matters. Marcus was no longer trying to hide his discomfort. The egalitarian philosophy I was articulating was fundamentally incompatible with the hierarchical worldview that had shaped his entire career. He had built his identity around being superior to people like me, and my promotion represented an existential challenge to everything he believed about merit, authority, and social order. Moving forward, how we treat each other will matter as much as what we accomplish, I said firmly. Talent and dedication exist at every level of this organization, and our job as leaders is to recognize it, nurture it, and create opportunities for it to flourish. The speech was drawing to a close, but I could see that its impact was just beginning. The room full of people who had dismissed me for 3 years was now forced to confront the reality that their assumptions had been wrong, their behavior had been observed and documented, and their professional futures depended on someone they had never bothered to take seriously. As I prepared to step away from the podium, I looked out over the crowd one more time, taking in their expressions of shock, fear, calculation, and in some cases, genuine excitement about the possibilities I had outlined. The real work was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid. Everyone in the room now understood that Pinnacle Tech was about to change in fundamental ways, and that their success in the new environment would depend on their ability to adapt to a very different set of values and expectations. The woman they had called the IT girl was now their CEO, and the transformation was already underway. The applause that followed my presentation was scattered and uncertain, a handful of employees clapping enthusiastically, while others remained frozen in contemplation of what they had just witnessed. The sound echoed strangely in the vast ballroom, highlighting the division that was already forming between those who embraced the transformation I had outlined, and those who viewed it as a threat to everything they had worked to achieve. As I stepped away from the podium, Robert Hayes approached with a warm smile and extended his hand in congratulations. The gesture was symbolic and deliberate, a public transfer of authority that left no room for doubt about the board's commitment to their decision. When we shook hands, cameras flashed throughout the room as photographers captured the historic moment for posterity and corporate communications. "Congratulations, Emily," Hayes said loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I have complete confidence that you'll lead this company to heights I could never have imagined." The endorsement was genuine and powerful, coming from a man whose business acumen was legendary throughout Austin's tech community. His public support would carry significant weight with investors, clients, and employees who might otherwise question the wisdom of promoting someone so young to such a critical position. But even as I accepted Hayes's congratulations, I was acutely aware of the undercurrents of tension flowing through the crowd. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a complex mixture of emotions as different people processed the implications of my promotion for their own careers and aspirations. Marcus had not moved from his position near the bar, but his expression had transformed from disbelief to something much more dangerous. The man who had built his identity around dominance and control was now faced with the reality that he would be answering to someone he had spent years treating as irrelevant. His hands were clenched at his sides, and I could see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to figure out how to respond to this unexpected reversal of fortune. Amanda had recovered some of her composure, but her smile looked painted on as she navigated through clusters of colleagues, undoubtedly trying to assess how the new power structure would affect her own position. Her political instincts were telling her to adapt quickly to the changing circumstances, but her ego was clearly struggling with the need to defer to someone she had previously dismissed. David Chen had disappeared entirely, probably retreating to process the implications of my promotion in private. His history of casual cruelty and discriminatory behavior had just become a significant liability, and he was smart enough to recognize that his survival in the new environment would depend on dramatic changes in his conduct. Jessica Lisher approached me with genuine excitement radiating from her expression. "Emily, that was incredible. The way you laid out the transformation strategy, the research you presented, the vision for the future Celius, it was exactly what this company needs." Her enthusiasm was infectious and provided a welcome contrast to the suspicious glances and whispered conversations happening elsewhere in the room. Jessica had been my closest ally during the 18-month preparation period, and her support had been crucial in maintaining my sanity during some of the more challenging moments of the undercover evaluation process. "Thank you for believing in this from the beginning," I replied quietly, grateful for her unwavering confidence during times when I had doubted my own ability to pull off such an ambitious plan. "I couldn't have done any of this without your guidance and support." Our conversation was interrupted by the approach of several board members who wanted to congratulate me personally and discuss the implementation timeline for various aspects of the transformation strategy. These interactions were crucial for establishing my credibility with the financial and strategic leadership of the company, and I made sure to engage with each person thoughtfully and professionally. But I was also monitoring Marcus out of the corner of my eye, watching as he gradually worked his way through the crowd toward my position. His movement was deliberate and predatory, and I recognized the expression he wore from countless sales meetings where he had prepared to demolish a competitor or intimidate a reluctant client. He was approaching me like an adversary rather than a colleague, and I prepared myself for what was likely to be an unpleasant confrontation. When he finally reached me, Marcus waited for a break in my conversation with the board members before stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily," he said with exaggerated politeness, "congratulations on your promotion. I have to admit, this certainly wasn't what anyone expected tonight." The words themselves were appropriate, but his tone carried an undercurrent of challenge that made it clear he wasn't simply offering congratulations. Several people nearby turned to listen, sensing the tension that was building between us. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied calmly, matching his superficial politeness while making it clear through my body language that I wasn't intimidated by his presence. "I'm looking forward to working with you in whatever capacity best serves the company's needs." The subtle reminder of my new authority was deliberate, and I could see it register in his expression. For the first time in our 3-year history, he was the subordinate in our interaction, and the psychological adjustment was clearly difficult for him to process. "I'm sure we'll have plenty to discuss about how the transition will work," he said, his smile becoming more strained. "After all, there are a lot of client relationships and strategic initiatives that require experienced oversight. I hope you'll be open to guidance from those of us who have been managing these responsibilities for years." The challenge was barely veiled now. Marcus was testing whether I would defer to his supposed expertise, whether I might be overwhelmed by the scope of my new responsibilities, and willing to delegate authority back to the people who had held it previously. "I appreciate your concern about continuity," I replied, keeping my voice level and professional. "That's exactly why I spent 18 months working in every department, building relationships with our clients, and understanding our strategic initiatives from the ground up. I'm confident that the transition will be smooth, and that all critical relationships will be maintained." Several people had stopped their own conversations to listen to our exchange, recognizing the significance of this first public interaction between the new CEO and the person who had expected to hold that position himself. The dynamic between us would set the tone for how the broader organization adapted to the new power structure. Marcus's expression darkened slightly as he realized that I wasn't going to be intimidated or manipulated into sharing authority with him. "Of course," he said, his tone becoming more clipped. "Though I hope you understand that some of our major clients have specific expectations about who they work with. Relationships that have been built over years can't simply be transferred overnight." The implication was clear. He was suggesting that important clients might not want to work with me, that my promotion could jeopardize crucial business relationships that he had cultivated. It was a subtle form of professional blackmail, an attempt to make me dependent on his continued involvement in client management. "That's an interesting point," I replied, pulling out my tablet and scrolling to a specific section of data. "Actually, I've had the opportunity to work directly with most of our major clients over the past 18 months, often in technical consulting roles that gave me deep insight into their operations and challenges." I turned the screen so that Marcus and several nearby observers could see the client satisfaction scores I had compiled. In fact, client feedback consistently rated the support they received during my involvement higher than previous interactions. Several specifically mentioned the value of working with someone who understood both the technical and business aspects of their needs. The data was devastating to Marcus's argument, and I could see him struggling to process this new information. His assumption that clients would prefer working with him was based on his own ego rather than actual feedback. Evidence I was presenting directly contradicted his narrative about his indispensable value to the company. Moreover, I continued, advancing to another screen of data. Our client retention analysis shows that accounts managed with collaborative, consultative approaches have 92% renewal rates, while accounts managed with high-pressure sales tactics have only 73% renewal rates. Marcus went very still as the implications of this comparison became clear. I was essentially presenting evidence that his aggressive sales methods were actually damaging long-term client relationships, that his approach was costing the company money rather than generating sustainable value. "I'm sure there are various factors that contribute to those numbers," he said stiffly, but his confidence was clearly shaken by the specificity of the data I was presenting. "Absolutely," I agreed. "That's why we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all client relationships over the next 60 days. We want to understand exactly which approaches are generating the best outcomes so we can replicate those methods across the entire sales organization." The review I was describing would inevitably reveal the problems with Marcus's management style, while highlighting the success of more collaborative approaches. He was intelligent enough to recognize that his methods were about to be evaluated against objective metrics, rather than his own self-promotion. Amanda had been listening to our exchange from a few feet away, and she chose this moment to insert herself into the conversation. "Emily, I think what Marcus is trying to say is that there's a lot of institutional knowledge that shouldn't be overlooked in the transition process. Those of us who have been in leadership roles have insights that might not be apparent from other perspectives." Her intervention was strategic, designed to support Marcus while positioning herself as a reasonable voice for continuity and stability. But I had been observing Amanda's political maneuvering for months, and I understood exactly what she was trying to accomplish. "You're absolutely right about the value of institutional knowledge," I replied, turning to include her in the conversation. "That's why I'm planning to conduct detailed interviews with every department head and team leader over the next month. I want to capture all of that experience and wisdom in our strategic planning process." Amanda's smile faltered slightly as she realized that the interviews I was describing would give me direct access to her subordinates, potentially revealing information about her management style that she preferred to keep private. The transparent approach I was advocating would make it much harder for managers to maintain artificial authority based on information control. "Though I should mention," I continued, "that we'll also be implementing anonymous feedback systems so that employees can share their perspectives without fear of retaliation. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from people who haven't felt safe expressing their opinions under previous management structures." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Both Marcus and Amanda had used intimidation and fear to maintain control over their teams, and the anonymous feedback system would expose their methods while giving their subordinates a voice in the transformation process. "That sounds very thorough," Amanda said carefully, clearly trying to figure out how to respond to this development without appearing defensive or uncooperative. "Transparency is essential for building trust," I replied. "Employees need to know that their input is valued and that leadership decisions are based on evidence rather than politics or personal preferences." The conversation was drawing attention from throughout the ballroom as word spread about the confrontation that was unfolding between the new CEO and the previous power structure. People were positioning themselves to observe the interaction, recognizing that this moment would define the tone for all future relationships within the company. Marcus made one final attempt to assert his relevance to the new order. "Well, I hope you'll find time in your busy schedule to meet with the senior sales team soon. There are some urgent client situations that need immediate attention, and I'm not sure they can wait for the comprehensive review process you're describing." The urgency he was claiming was almost certainly manufactured, designed to create pressure for me to rely on his expertise rather than developing my own understanding of the situation. It was a classic manipulation technique, creating artificial deadlines to force quick decisions that favored his interests. "I appreciate you bringing that to my attention," I said, consulting my tablet once more. "According to the client status reports I've been reviewing, all of our major accounts are current on their contracts with no outstanding issues. But if there are specific situations that need immediate attention, please send me detailed briefings tonight so I can address them first thing Monday morning." The response demonstrated that I already had access to comprehensive information about client relationships, making his claims about urgent situations appear either uninformed or deliberately deceptive. By asking for detailed briefings, I was also creating a paper trail that would reveal whether his concerns were legitimate or strategic manipulation. Marcus's expression had become openly hostile as he realized that none of his usual tactics were working. The combination of my preparation, my access to data, and my refusal to be intimidated had neutralized every argument he had attempted to make. "I suppose we'll see how the transition goes," he said finally, his tone making it clear that he viewed the situation as temporary and expected me to fail quickly enough for him to reclaim his expected position. "I'm sure we will," I replied calmly, making it equally clear that I was confident in my ability to succeed and had no intention of stepping aside for his convenience. As Marcus walked away, followed by Amanda and several other members of the old guard, I could see the division that was forming within the company. Some employees were approaching to congratulate me and express excitement about the changes I had outlined, while others were retreating into defensive clusters, whispering among themselves about strategies for protecting their positions in the new environment. The transformation I had promised would not be easy or painless. There would be resistance, sabotage attempts, and efforts to undermine my authority at every step of the process. But as I looked around the ballroom at the faces of employees who had never before had a voice in company direction, I felt a deep sense of purpose and determination. The woman they had whispered about as the loser was now their CEO, and the real work of proving their assumptions wrong had only just begun. Over the following months, I would demonstrate that leadership wasn't about intimidation or politics, but about vision, competence, and the ability to bring out the best in every person within the organization. The party was ending, but the transformation of Pinnacle Tech was just getting started. And for the first time in 3 years, I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months after that transformative night at the Hilton downtown Austin, I sat in the corner office that had once belonged to Robert Hayes, reviewing quarterly reports that told a story of unprecedented growth and cultural transformation. The numbers on my screen painted a picture that even the most optimistic projections hadn't anticipated. Employee satisfaction up 68%, client retention at an all-time high of 94%, and revenue growth exceeding 23% year over year. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space I had completely redesigned to reflect the collaborative leadership philosophy that now defined Pinnacle Tech. Gone were the intimidating leather furniture and imposing mahogany desk that had served as barriers between leadership and employees. In their place, I had installed a circular conference table, comfortable seating areas, and wall-mounted displays that showcased real-time data about company performance and employee achievements. My assistant knocked gently on the open door, a practice I had instituted to ensure that my office remained accessible rather than fortress-like. "Emily, the Austin Business Journal reporter, is here for your interview about the company transformation." The media attention had been relentless since our dramatic turnaround became public knowledge. Industry publications, business schools, and leadership consultants all wanted to understand how a company could achieve such rapid cultural and financial improvement. The story of the underestimated IT support specialist who became CEO and revolutionized her organization had become something of a legend in Austin's tech community. "Send her in," I replied, closing the laptop and preparing for what would be my 15th interview in the past month. The attention was gratifying, but more importantly, it was helping to establish Pinnacle Tech as an employer of choice for top talent who wanted to work in an environment where merit mattered more than politics. Sarah Henderson from the Austin Business Journal entered with the kind of confident professionalism that I had come to associate with successful journalists. She had covered the tech industry for over a decade and had a reputation for asking probing questions that revealed the substance behind corporate success stories. "Miss Carter, thank you for taking the time to speak with me," she began, settling into one of the comfortable chairs I had arranged for interviews. "Your company's transformation has been remarkable, but I'm particularly interested in the human element of this story. What happened to the people who opposed your leadership initially?" It was a question I had been expecting, and one that required careful consideration. The fate of Marcus, Amanda, and others who had resisted the changes I implemented had become a case study in how organizations handle entrenched power structures during periods of rapid transformation. Change is always difficult, I began thoughtfully. Some people embraced the new direction immediately, while others needed time to adjust their approaches and expectations. We tried to provide support and development opportunities for everyone, but ultimately individuals had to make their own choices about whether they could adapt to our evolving culture. The diplomatic answer was accurate, but didn't capture the full complexity of what had unfolded over the past 6 months. The real story involved careful documentation, strategic patience, and the inevitable consequences of refusing to change destructive behaviors when the organizational environment no longer protected or rewarded them. Marcus had been the first to go, though not in the dramatic confrontation that many employees had anticipated. Instead, his departure had been the result of a systematic process that began with the comprehensive client review I had promised at the company party. When we analyzed his accounts objectively, the data revealed a pattern of short-term gains achieved at the expense of long-term relationships. His aggressive tactics had indeed generated impressive quarterly numbers, but at a cost that became apparent only when we examined client satisfaction surveys and renewal rates over multiple years. Several major clients had been planning to terminate their contracts, frustrated by the high-pressure approach that prioritized immediate sales over genuine problem-solving. The revelation had been devastating to Marcus's position within the company, but I had handled it professionally and privately. Rather than publicly humiliating him, I had arranged a confidential meeting where we reviewed the data together and discussed his options moving forward. "Marcus," I had said during that difficult conversation, "your sales skills are undeniable, but your methods aren't aligned with our long-term strategy. I'm willing to provide coaching and support if you're interested in adapting your approach, or we can discuss a transition plan that allows you to find a better fit elsewhere." His response had been predictable. The man who had built his identity around dominance and control couldn't accept feedback from someone he had spent years dismissing. Instead of acknowledging the validity of the data or expressing willingness to change, he had chosen defiance and ultimately resignation. "I won't pretend it was easy," I told the reporter honestly. "Losing experienced team members is always challenging, even when their departure opens opportunities for positive change. But we discovered that several high-performing individuals had been considering leaving because of the toxic environment. Addressing the cultural issues actually improved our talent retention overall." Amanda's story had been more complex and ultimately more hopeful. Unlike Marcus, she had possessed enough self-awareness to recognize that her previous methods weren't sustainable under the new leadership structure. When I offered her the opportunity to participate in our management development program, she had accepted with what seemed like genuine relief. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. Amanda had spent years building her authority on information control and political maneuvering, skills that were largely useless in the transparent collaborative environment we were creating. But she had also possessed genuine marketing talents that had been obscured by her need to protect her position through manipulation. Working with executive coaches and participating in cross-departmental projects, Amanda gradually developed a more authentic leadership style that focused on empowering her team rather than dominating them. Her department's performance improved dramatically as employees felt safe contributing ideas and taking calculated risks. One of the most rewarding aspects of this process has been watching people discover their potential when they're no longer constrained by fear or political considerations. I continued, thinking about Amanda's transformation and several similar success stories. We've seen incredible innovation and engagement from employees who previously felt like they had to hide their capabilities. David Chen had been terminated within the first 90 days, but not for the reasons most people expected. While his history of inappropriate comments and discriminatory behavior had made him a liability, the immediate cause of his dismissal was performance-related. When we implemented transparent project evaluation systems, it became apparent that his contributions had been minimal for years. The anonymous feedback system I had promised revealed that David had been coasting on the work of others, while taking credit for their achievements. His dismissal had actually been requested by his own team members, who provided detailed documentation of his parasitic behavior and its impact on departmental productivity. We discovered that some of our perceived high performers were actually preventing their teams from reaching full potential, I explained to the reporter. When we created systems for recognizing individual contributions rather than just departmental results, the real talent became visible while those who had been taking unfair credit were exposed. The conversation turned to the specific changes we had implemented and their measurable impacts. The innovation labs I had established in each department were generating an average of 3 viable product improvements per month, compared to the previous rate of less than 1 per quarter. Employee turnover had dropped by 47%, saving significant costs in recruitment and training while preserving institutional knowledge. The financial results speak for themselves, I said, pulling up a presentation that had become standard for these interviews. But the cultural transformation is equally important. We've created an environment where people are excited to come to work, where they feel valued and heard, where they can see direct connections between their efforts and company success. The reporter asked about the challenges of managing people who had previously been my superiors, and I reflected on the complexity of those relationships. Some former managers had struggled with the role reversal, unable to accept direction from someone they had dismissed for years. Others had surprised me with their professionalism and adaptability. Leadership isn't about hierarchy, I explained. It's about vision, competence, and the ability to bring out the best in others. Some people understood that immediately, while others needed time to adjust their perspectives. A few never made the transition, but that's their choice. The conversation inevitably returned to that night at the corporate party, the moment when everything changed publicly. The reporter wanted to understand the psychology of the transformation, how it felt to go from being dismissed to being an absolute authority over those who had dismissed me. Honestly, the most powerful moment wasn't when I walked to that podium, I admitted. It was 3 months later, when Marcus's former team came to me individually to express gratitude for the changes we had made. They told me stories about ideas they had been afraid to share, innovations they had abandoned because of fear of retaliation, contributions they had wanted to make, but couldn't under the previous culture. The vindication had been complete, but not in the way I had initially imagined. Rather than simply proving my worth to people who had underestimated me, I had created an environment where everyone could prove their worth without fear of political consequences or personal attacks. We had several employees who had been planning to leave the company because they felt undervalued and unheard, I continued. Not only did they stay, but they became some of our most innovative contributors once they felt safe expressing their ideas. The reporter asked about my advice for other organizations facing similar cultural challenges, and I found myself thinking about the broader implications of our transformation. The problems we had addressed weren't unique to Pinnacle Tech. They existed in countless companies where talent was wasted because of toxic leadership and political dysfunction. The key is creating systems that reward actual performance rather than political maneuvering, I said. When people know their contributions will be recognized fairly, when they feel safe expressing dissenting opinions, when they see clear connections between effort and advancement, they'll invest themselves fully in the organization's success. We discussed the role of data in driving cultural change, and I showed her some of the analytics tools we had developed to track employee engagement, project outcomes, and client satisfaction in real time. The transparency had been initially uncomfortable for managers who were used to controlling information flow, but it had ultimately created accountability that improved performance across every department. Numbers don't lie, I explained, pointing to dashboard displays that showed current metrics. When everyone can see how their work contributes to overall success, when achievements are measured objectively rather than subjectively, politics become irrelevant. People focus on results instead of impression management. The interview concluded with questions about my future plans and the lessons I had learned from the experience. As I reflect on the journey from dismissed IT support to transformational CEO, I realized that the most important insight wasn't about business strategy or leadership techniques. The biggest lesson is that potential exists everywhere, often in places where conventional wisdom suggests we shouldn't look. I said, organizations that recognize and develop that potential will always outperform those that rely on traditional hierarchies and inherited authority. After the reporter left, I remained in my office reviewing the quarterly reports that had started my morning. The numbers were impressive, but they represented something more important than financial success. They demonstrated that respect, transparency, and genuine merit-based advancement could create sustainable competitive advantages that no amount of political maneuvering could match. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Liebelt, who had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer and had become my closest collaborator in implementing the transformation strategy. Board meeting went great. They're impressed with Q3 results and want to discuss expansion plans. Drinks tonight to celebrate. I smiled, remembering the woman who had believed in me when no one else would, who had supported the risky decision to work undercover for 18 months, who had provided encouragement during moments when the plan seemed impossible to execute. Absolutely, I texted back. We've earned it. As evening approached, I walked through the office spaces that had been completely transformed over the past 6 months. The cubicle farms had been replaced with collaborative work areas. The closed-door meetings had given way to transparent project discussions. The whispered conversations and political maneuvering had been replaced by open debate about ideas and strategies. In the technical support department where I had supposedly worked for 3 years, I stopped to chat with the current team leader, a brilliant young woman who had been promoted based on her innovative problem-solving approaches, rather than seniority or political connections. She was excited to show me the customer satisfaction scores for her department, which had reached historic highs. "Emily," she said with genuine enthusiasm, "I wanted to thank you again for creating an environment where people like us can contribute meaningfully to company success. Before the changes, I never would have imagined that someone from my background could aspire to leadership roles." Her gratitude was humbling and reminded me why the transformation had been worth the risks and challenges. Talent had always existed throughout Pinnacle Tech, but it had been suppressed by systems that prioritized political loyalty over genuine capability. As I prepared to leave the office, I received an email from a business school professor who was developing a case study about our transformation. She wanted to interview me about the strategic planning process and the techniques we had used to overcome organizational resistance to change. The academic attention was flattering, but more importantly, it suggested that our approach might help other organizations struggling with similar cultural dysfunction. If the lessons we had learned could prevent even one talented person from being dismissed or undervalued because of political bias, the effort would be worthwhile. Walking through the parking garage toward my car, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had been mocked as the loser at a corporate party was now being studied as an example of transformational leadership. The quiet IT support specialist had become a CEO, whose methods were being replicated by companies across the industry. But the most satisfying transformation wasn't my own. It was the collective awakening of an organization that had rediscovered its potential by finally recognizing the value of every individual within it. The whispers about the loser had been replaced by conversations about innovation, collaboration, and shared success. As I drove through downtown Austin, past the Hilton where everything had changed that pivotal night, I smiled at the thought of how wrong they had all been about me. But more importantly, I thought about how wrong they had been about themselves, about what they were capable of achieving when fear and politics were replaced by respect and genuine opportunity. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that merit-based leadership could create sustainable success that benefited everyone involved. And I was exactly where I belonged, leading an organization that had learned to see potential everywhere it existed, rather than only where tradition suggested it should be found. 2 years after that life-changing night at the corporate party, I stood before a packed auditorium at the Austin Convention Center, preparing to deliver the keynote address at the Southwest Technology Leadership Summit. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus Thompson sat in the third row, taking notes as a mid-level sales manager at a competing firm, while I commanded the attention of over 2,000 industry executives as one of the most celebrated CEOs in Texas. The journey to this podium had been extraordinary, but it was the message I was about to deliver that truly mattered. Behind me, a massive screen displayed the title of my presentation, The Hidden Potential Revolution: How Overlooked Talent Transforms Organizations. The subtitle read, A CEO's Guide to Finding Excellence Where You're Not Looking. As I looked out over the sea of faces, I recognized many people who had dismissed me during my years in technical support, individuals who now sought my advice on leadership and organizational transformation. The reversal was complete, but more importantly, the lessons learned during that transformation had evolved into a methodology that was changing how companies identified and developed talent. 3 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the advanced sound system. I was invisible in my own workplace, not because I lacked capability or ambition, but because the systems designed to recognize talent were fundamentally flawed. They looked for leadership potential in all the traditional places, while ignoring the innovation happening at every level of the organization. The audience was completely silent, leaning forward with the kind of attention that speakers dream about. These weren't just polite professionals fulfilling networking obligations, they were leaders genuinely seeking solutions to problems that plagued their own organizations. Today I want to share not just the story of one company's transformation, but the framework we developed for identifying and unleashing potential that exists everywhere in your organizations. Because the truth is, the next breakthrough innovation in your company probably won't come from your executive team. It will come from someone you've never considered promoting, someone whose ideas have never made it past their immediate supervisor. I clicked to the first slide, which showed statistics from our comprehensive industry survey conducted over the past 18 months. The numbers were staggering and represented data from over 300 companies across 12 different sectors. Our research indicates that 67% of breakthrough innovations originate from employees below the director level, yet only 23% of these ideas ever reach decision makers who could implement them. We're losing revolutionary concepts because our promotion and recognition systems are designed to filter out rather than elevate the very thinking that could transform our industries. The data had been collected through partnerships with business schools and consulting firms, who were
studying organizational effectiveness. The pattern was consistent across companies of all sizes. The most transformative ideas were being generated by people who had direct contact with operational challenges, customer problems, and technological limitations. But these individuals rarely had access to the authority or resources needed to implement their solutions. At Pinnacle Tech, we discovered that our most valuable strategic insights were coming from customer service representatives who understood client pain points better than our account managers, from technical support specialists who saw system vulnerabilities that our security team missed, from administrative assistants who had identified workflow inefficiencies that could save millions of dollars annually. I advanced to a slide showing Pinnacle Tech's performance metrics over the past 2 years. The numbers told a story of unprecedented growth that had attracted attention from investors, competitors, and industry analysts around the world. Revenue growth of 147%. Employee satisfaction scores that rank in the top 5% of our industry. Client retention rates above 96%. Innovation pipeline generating an average of 12 viable product improvements per quarter. These aren't just numbers, they represent the transformation that happens when organizations learn to see and develop potential wherever it exists. The audience stirred with genuine interest. These were metrics that every leader in the room wanted to achieve, results that represented the holy grail of corporate performance. But more importantly, they demonstrated that the principles I was advocating weren't just feel-good management philosophy but practical strategies that delivered measurable business value. The methodology we developed isn't complex, but it requires leaders to abandon some deeply held assumptions about talent identification and career development. I continued, moving to a slide that outlined the core principles of what we had termed horizontal leadership development. First, we eliminated the assumption that leadership potential correlates with current position or traditional credentials. Some of our most effective leaders today were working in entry-level positions when we identified their capabilities. Their potential was invisible to conventional evaluation methods because it didn't manifest in ways that existing promotion criteria recognized. I told the story of Maria Gonzalez, who had been working in our accounts payable department when I noticed her ability to identify patterns in client behavior that predicted payment delays and potential contract renewals. Her analytical skills were extraordinary, but she had never been considered for strategic roles because she lacked an MBA and had started with the company in a clerical position. Today, Maria leads our business intelligence team and has developed predictive models that have improved our forecasting accuracy by 43%, I announced. Her innovations have generated over $8 million in improved cash flow management, and she's become one of the most sought-after strategic analysts in our industry. The transformation of individuals like Maria represented the core of our methodology, looking beyond job descriptions and formal qualifications to identify cognitive abilities, problem-solving approaches, and strategic thinking that could be applied to higher-level challenges. Second, we created multiple pathways for ideas to reach decision-makers, bypassing traditional hierarchical filters that often eliminated innovative concepts before they could be properly evaluated. I explained, showing a diagram of our flattened communication structure. The system we had implemented included monthly innovation forums, where any employee could present ideas directly to senior leadership, cross-departmental project teams that brought together expertise from different areas, and anonymous suggestion systems that protected people from potential retaliation for challenging existing methods. In our first year alone, this approach generated 47 implemented improvements that had previously been blocked by middle management, who viewed new ideas as threats to their authority rather than opportunities for advancement, I reported. The cumulative impact of these changes has been transformational for both our operational efficiency and our competitive positioning. I shared the story of James Park, a night shift security guard who had noticed unusual patterns in our building's energy consumption and had developed a comprehensive plan for reducing utility costs by 38%. His background was in facilities management rather than engineering, but his observations were more sophisticated than analysis conducted by expensive consulting firms. James's recommendations saved us over $400,000 in the first year alone, and his insights led to the development of our smart building management system, which we've now licensed to 12 other companies, I announced. He's currently completing an engineering degree that we're funding, and he'll be leading our sustainability initiatives starting next quarter. The audience was taking notes actively now, recognizing that these weren't isolated success stories but examples of systematic approaches that could be replicated in their own organizations. The methodology I was describing represented a fundamental shift in how companies could identify and develop talent. Third, we implemented transparent performance evaluation systems that measured actual contributions rather than political positioning or impression management. I continued, advancing to slides that showed our objective assessment criteria. The traditional performance review process had been completely redesigned to focus on measurable outcomes, peer feedback, and client impact rather than subjective evaluations by immediate supervisors. This change had been crucial for identifying high performers who had been overlooked because they didn't conform to conventional leadership stereotypes. We discovered that some of our supposedly strongest performers were actually preventing their teams from reaching full potential, while some of our most valuable contributors were being systematically under-recognized because their styles didn't match traditional management expectations. I explained. The data we had collected showed dramatic disparities between perceived performance and actual results. Several individuals who had been considered high-potential leaders were actually creating environments that reduced team productivity, increased turnover, and damaged client relationships. Meanwhile, quiet contributors who had been dismissed as lacking leadership presence were generating exceptional results through collaborative approaches and deep technical expertise. The revelation forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about effective leadership and career advancement criteria. I admitted, it turned out that many of our assumptions about what made someone promotable were not only wrong but were actively preventing us from recognizing our most capable people. I shared the story of David Kim, an introvert who worked in our quality assurance department and had developed testing methodologies that had reduced our defect rates by 67%. His innovations had saved the company millions of dollars and dramatically improved client satisfaction, but he had never been considered for leadership roles because he didn't fit the extroverted, charismatic profile that was traditionally associated with management potential. David now leads our quality management division and has trained teams at 6 other companies in his methodologies, I announced. His quiet, systematic approach has proven more effective for building sustainable excellence than the dramatic, personality-driven leadership styles we used to prioritize. The fourth principle I outlined involved creating development opportunities that were based on demonstrated capability rather than current position or traditional career paths. Instead of requiring people to advance through predetermined hierarchical steps, we had created project-based leadership roles that allowed individuals to take on increasing responsibility based on their proven ability to deliver results. We found that traditional promotion ladders often forced capable people into inappropriate roles, I explained, showing organizational charts that illustrated our new flexible structure. A brilliant technical specialist might be promoted to management and become miserable and ineffective, while someone with natural leadership abilities might be stuck in individual contributor roles because they lacked specific technical credentials. The new system allowed people to advance along multiple tracks, with compensation and recognition tied to value creation rather than hierarchical position. This approach had dramatically improved both job satisfaction and organizational effectiveness by ensuring that people were working in roles that matched their natural strengths and interests. Fifth, we established mentorship programs that connected high-potential individuals with leaders throughout the organization, regardless of departmental boundaries or traditional reporting relationships. I continued, describing our cross-functional development initiative. The program had been designed to ensure that talented people had access to guidance and opportunities even if their immediate supervisors weren't capable of recognizing or developing their potential. This approach had been crucial for preventing the kind of systematic suppression of talent that had characterized our previous culture. The results speak for themselves, I said, advancing to a slide that showed promotion and retention statistics. Internal advancement has increased by 84%, voluntary turnover has dropped to less than 6% annually, and employee engagement scores have reached levels that were previously considered impossible to achieve. But the most powerful validation of our approach had come from external recognition. Pinnacle Tech had been named one of the best places to work by 3 different industry publications, and our methodology was being studied by business schools as a case study in organizational transformation. The journey from being dismissed at a corporate party to standing on this stage isn't really about one person's career advancement, I said, moving toward the conclusion of my presentation. It's about the transformation that happens when organizations learn to see potential wherever it exists and create systems that allow that potential to flourish. The story I had been telling for the past 45 minutes wasn't ultimately about revenge or vindication, though both had certainly been satisfying. It was about the discovery that talent, innovation, and leadership capability were distributed throughout organizations in ways that traditional recognition systems completely failed to capture. Every organization in this room has individuals whose capabilities far exceed their current roles, people whose ideas could revolutionize your industries if those ideas could reach the right decision makers, I continued, looking directly at executives who I knew were struggling with innovation challenges and competitive pressures. The question isn't whether that potential exists in your company. The question is whether you're creating the conditions that allow you to recognize and develop it, or whether you're unconsciously perpetuating systems that suppress it in favor of more familiar but less effective approaches. I concluded with a call to action that challenged the audience to examine their own assumptions about talent identification and career development. The methodology we had developed at Pinnacle Tech wasn't proprietary, it was a framework that could be adapted to any organization willing to prioritize results over tradition. The transformation begins with a simple acknowledgement: the next breakthrough in your industry might come from someone sitting in your reception area, someone working the night shift, someone whose ideas have never been seriously considered because they don't fit your existing templates for leadership potential, I said. Your choice is whether you'll create the systems that allow you to discover and develop that potential, or whether you'll continue to overlook it until your competitors learn to see what you've missed. The applause that followed was sustained and enthusiastic, but more importantly, the questions during the session revealed genuine engagement with the concepts I had presented. These weren't just polite inquiries, they were strategic discussions about implementation challenges, measurement criteria, and adaptation strategies. As I left the stage and made my way through the crowd of executives who wanted to continue the conversation, I reflected on how completely the narrative had changed. The woman who had been whispered about as the loser was now being sought out for advice by industry leaders who recognized that her approach represented the future of organizational development. But the most satisfying transformation wasn't my own professional elevation, it was the knowledge that the principles we had discovered were being implemented by dozens of companies, creating opportunities for thousands of people whose potential had previously been overlooked or suppressed. The revolution I had described wasn't about individual success stories, it was about systemic change that could unlock human potential on a massive scale. And as I looked out over an auditorium full of leaders who were beginning to understand that their assumptions about talent might be fundamentally flawed, I knew that the real transformation was just beginning. The whispers had been replaced by recognition, the dismissal had become respect, and the systems that had once suppressed potential were being rebuilt to celebrate it. The loser at the corporate party had become the voice of a movement that was changing how organizations everywhere understood the relationship between potential and opportunity, and that transformation was worth everything it had taken to achieve it. 5 years had passed since that transformative evening at the corporate party, and I found myself standing in the marble lobby of the newly constructed Pinnacle Tech Innovation Campus, watching employees stream through the glass doors with the kind of energy and purpose that only exists in organizations where people truly believe in their mission. The building itself was a testament to how far we had come, its open architecture and collaborative spaces, reflecting the radical cultural shift that had turned a dysfunctional company into an industry leader. The morning light filtered through the soaring atrium as I made my way to the executive briefing room, where the board of directors was gathering for what would be a historic announcement. After years of speculation and strategic planning, we were finally ready to reveal the next phase of Pinnacle Tech's evolution, a decision that would cement our position as not just a successful company, but as a catalyst for transformation throughout the technology sector. Margaret Chen, our board chair and one of the most respected investors in Austin's tech ecosystem, greeted me with the kind of warm smile that had become commonplace but never felt routine. The woman who had initially been skeptical of promoting someone so young to the CEO position had become one of my strongest advocates, frequently citing our partnership as proof that traditional leadership assumptions were not just wrong but actively harmful to business success. Emily, the Goldman Sachs team will be here in 30 minutes for the final presentation, she said, her excitement barely contained despite her usual professional composure. The valuation numbers came in this morning, and I think you'll be pleased with their assessment of what we've built here. The numbers she was referring to represented the culmination of everything we had worked toward since that night when I walked to the podium as the newly announced CEO. What had started as a $150 million regional technology consulting firm had evolved into something far more significant, a company whose methodologies and culture had attracted attention from investors, competitors, and organizations around the world. As I reviewed the presentation materials one final time, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear, there had been setbacks, failures, and moments when the radical changes we were implementing seemed too ambitious to sustain, but the persistence had paid off in ways that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The conference room filled gradually with the people who had been instrumental in our evolution. Jessica Liu, now our Chief Operating Officer, had become the architect of our internal systems and the guardian of our cultural values. Her ability to translate vision into operational reality had been crucial for maintaining our momentum during periods of rapid growth and change. Robert Hayes, despite his official retirement, had remained connected to the company as an advisor and mentor, his wisdom invaluable as we navigated challenges that no business school textbook could have prepared us for. His presence at today's meeting reflected the significance of what we were about to announce and his continuing investment in our success. Even some of the transformation's most unlikely success stories were represented in the room. Amanda Walsh, who had evolved from a defensive political operator into one of our most effective collaborative leaders, now headed our client experience division and had been instrumental in achieving the retention rates that made our growth sustainable. The Goldman Sachs team arrived precisely on time, led by Victoria Stevens, a managing director whose reputation for identifying transformational investment opportunities was legendary throughout the financial community. Her presence signaled that what we were discussing wasn't just another corporate transaction, but a recognition of something genuinely innovative in how businesses could be structured and operated. Miss Carter, Victoria said, as we settled around the conference table, your company's performance metrics over the past 5 years represent something we rarely see in the market. The combination of financial growth, cultural transformation, and scalable methodology has created what our analysts believe is a unique value proposition. The presentation that followed detailed the analysis that had led to this meeting. Pinnacle Tech's revenue had grown by over 400% during my tenure as CEO, but more importantly, the sustainability of that growth had been demonstrated through consistent year-over-year improvements in every key performance indicator. Our employee satisfaction scores remained in the top 1% of all technology companies, despite the challenges of scaling culture through periods of rapid expansion. Client retention rates had actually improved as we grew, defying the conventional wisdom that larger organizations inevitably become less responsive to customer needs. Most significantly, our innovation pipeline had accelerated rather than slowed as we expanded, generating breakthrough solutions that had attracted licensing interest from companies throughout our industry. The methodology we had developed for identifying and developing hidden talent had become a competitive advantage that competitors were struggling to replicate. What makes your approach particularly valuable, Victoria continued, is that it's not dependent on exceptional individuals or unique market conditions. You've created systems that consistently produce exceptional results regardless of external factors or personnel changes. The observation was accurate and represented perhaps our greatest achievement. Rather than building success around charismatic leadership or market timing, we had developed processes that unleashed human potential systematically and sustainably. The approach could be taught, learned, and implemented by other organizations, making it genuinely scalable in ways that traditional business models were not. The board has been considering various strategic options, Margaret explained, looking around the table at the directors who had supported our transformation journey from the beginning. The question isn't whether we should pursue growth opportunities, but which approach will allow us to maximize our impact while maintaining the values and culture that have made us successful. The options we had been evaluating ranged from traditional expansion strategies to more ambitious transformational approaches. We could continue growing organically, expanding our consulting services to additional markets and industry sectors. We could pursue strategic acquisitions, identifying companies whose cultures aligned with our values and integrating them into our methodology, or we could take the bold step that Victoria and her team were recommending, transforming Pinnacle Tech from a successful consulting firm into something unprecedented in the business world, a comprehensive platform for organizational transformation that could be implemented by companies across every industry sector. Our recommendation is that you consider going public with a dual mission, Victoria explained, advancing to a slide that outlined their strategic vision. Pinnacle Tech would continue operating as a profitable consulting and technology firm, but you would also establish the Pinnacle Institute, a separate division focused on teaching your methodology to other organizations. The concept was ambitious and revolutionary. Instead of keeping our transformation strategies proprietary, we would make them available to any organization willing to commit to implementing genuine cultural change. The Institute would provide training, consulting, and certification programs that could spread our approach throughout the business community. The financial projections are extraordinary, Victoria continued, showing models that demonstrated potential revenue streams from multiple sources. Consulting revenue continues growing at current rates, technology licensing generates increasing royalties, institute programs create recurring education revenue, and the combined valuation reflects the scalability of your integrated approach. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what excited me most about the proposal. The real opportunity was to transform how organizations everywhere understood the relationship between culture and performance, to make the principles we had discovered accessible to millions of employees who were currently trapped in systems that suppressed their potential. There's one additional element to consider, Margaret said, her tone becoming more serious. Going public with this model would make you one of the youngest female CEOs in the technology sector, and your story would inevitably become part of how the company is perceived and valued. The observation was sobering and reflected realities about public attention that I had been avoiding during our years of private growth. The media interest in our transformation had been manageable when we were a regional consulting firm, but leading a publicly traded company focused on organizational change would inevitably attract scrutiny that went far beyond business performance. I understand the implications, I replied carefully, but I also understand that the principles we've discovered are too important to keep confined to one company. If going public is the most effective way to scale our impact, then that's what we should do. The decision wasn't made lightly or quickly. Over the following weeks, we conducted extensive analysis of market conditions, competitive landscapes, and implementation challenges. We consulted with experts in organizational psychology, business transformation, and educational methodology to ensure that our approach could maintain its effectiveness at much larger scales. Most importantly, we surveyed our own employees to understand their perspectives on the proposed expansion. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people expressing excitement about the opportunity to share their transformation experiences with others and to become part of a movement that could improve working conditions for millions of people. The formal announcement came 6 months later, at a press conference that attracted attention from business media, organizational development experts, and social impact investors from around the world. Standing at the podium in the same hotel ballroom where my journey had begun, I reflected on the circular nature of the moment and the incredible distance we had all traveled. 5 years ago, many people in this room would have been surprised to see me speaking to you as a CEO, I began, acknowledging the irony without dwelling on past grievances. Today, I'm here to announce something that I hope will surprise you in a different way: the launch of an initiative designed to ensure that what happened at Pinnacle Tech can happen anywhere. The announcement of our public offering and the establishment of the Pinnacle Institute generated immediate interest from organizations across multiple sectors. Within the first month, we received inquiries from healthcare systems, educational institutions, manufacturing companies, and government agencies, all seeking to implement our methodology in their own environments. The response validated our belief that the problems we had solved weren't unique to technology consulting, but represented fundamental challenges in how human potential was recognized and developed across all types of organizations. The opportunity to address those challenges systematically, at scale, represented a mission that went far beyond business success. As I concluded the press conference and fielded questions from reporters who were genuinely interested in understanding our methodology rather than just reporting financial projections, I realized that the transformation I had experienced personally was now becoming part of something much larger and more significant. The woman who had been whispered about as the loser at a corporate party was now launching a movement designed to ensure that no one's potential would be overlooked or dismissed because of superficial assumptions about capability and worth. The journey from invisible employee to transformational leader had become a platform for changing how organizations everywhere understood and developed human talent. The whispers had been replaced by recognition, the dismissal had become influence, and the systems that had once suppressed potential were being rebuilt on principles that celebrated it. But more than personal vindication, what we had achieved represented proof that business success and human dignity were not competing values, but complementary forces that could create sustainable prosperity for everyone involved. The real victory wasn't in proving wrong the people who had underestimated me, but in creating systems that would prevent other talented individuals from experiencing the dismissal and marginalization that had once defined my professional life. That transformation, scaled across industries and implemented throughout the business community, represented a legacy worth everything it had taken to achieve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.